I remember the light first, late afternoon sun pouring through the tall windows at Westfield Academy, dust floating like it had somewhere to be. Parents packed into rows with their phones raised like shields. And in the middle of all that shine sat a little girl who hadn't spoken a word in months, while her billionaire father tried to look like a man who could fix anything. Even the sound of silence, you know what I mean? I'd taught kindergarten for 6 years. I'd seen tantrums turn into jokes, and shy kids bloom when someone finally noticed their drawing. But I had never met a silence like Sophia's. It wasn't stubborn or dramatic. It was protective, like a small animal choosing the dark because the light had hurt. I'm Grace Matthews. I don't own a company or a yacht. I own a box of watercolor brushes, 100 ways to say, take your time, and a belief that feelings aren't problems to solve. They're doors, and when you stop rattling the handle and just sit next to the kid, sometimes the door opens. We were doing the end-of-year show, the one where parents cry at off-key songs, and kids forget their lines, and the world doesn't end. And I had a plan that didn't require Sophia to speak. I had her painting on an easel. A garden so alive it made the cheap auditorium lights feel warm. A golden leaf tree with a swing, 2 figures on that swing, holding hands, the kind of picture that isn't pretty, it's true, Mrs. Caldwell from the board had already told me not to draw attention to the situation, which is a polite way to say, make the child disappear, and yeah, that happened. She said it with a smile so tight it creaked while a donor plaque glinted behind her like a second opinion. But I pretended I hadn't heard it, because some days you choose the kid over the rule book, and you live with it. The show ran like shows run, poems, science tricks with baking soda laughter that ran too long, and then ran out tiny shoes tapping the stage. And when it was Sophia's turn, I kept my voice low and steady. I told the room she had something beautiful to share. I told her she could whisper to me, and I'd carry her words if she wanted. Or she could just stand there and let the painting speak, because sometimes that's enough. The hush that fell wasn't the bored kind. It was the kind people don't practice anymore. The kind where you wait with someone, and then a chair scraped. Sophia stood her braid, catching the light, and she stepped to the easel and touched the paper like it might evaporate. Her finger found the tree, her mouth found a sound, and she said, "That's our tree, the one in the backyard." And I swear the air in that place changed temperature. She said her mom used to push her after school, higher, bug, higher, and when the leaves went gold, they tried to touch them. And she said Mom was in heaven now, and if she closed her eyes and thought really hard, she could still feel a hand on her back, not pushing, holding, and in the front row, Richard Wellington, whose face I'd only seen in magazines and on billboards, forgot how to be a headline and remembered how to be a father. His shoulders shook, his hands went to his mouth, and nobody cared about optics. I asked Sophia a question she already knew the answer to, not because I needed to hear it, but because sometimes you have to steer into the truth, or you'll keep skidding around it. And she said she had stopped talking, because saying it made it real. And I said talking doesn't make it more real. It makes it less heavy, and she nodded. Like her heart knew that, before her voice did, then she turned. A little looked right at her dad and said, "Hi, Daddy." And you could feel the room be glad to be in a room again, not online, not performing, just present. People clap in different dialects. Polite claps, proud claps, look at my kid claps. But this was the quietest sound I've ever heard, if that makes sense. It was gratitude, and then the applause came like an exhale, not loud, but deep. That night, after flowers and crackly plastic and photos that will live forever on phones that die every 2 years, Richard found me by the stage door, his tie loose. His voice wrecked, and he thanked me with the kind of careful words powerful men use when they're trying not to break the moment, by naming it He said, every expert had tried. He said, I'd done what they couldn't, and I told him the truth that made his eyebrows crease. I said she did it, I just kept the door open and the lights on. Then came the twist. He offered me the job only people dream about when rent is due, private tutor for Sophia, full support, any resource I needed, a paycheck big enough to make student loans look small. I felt my old fear of not enough tap me on the shoulder. I heard the voice that says, take the lifeboat and don't look back, but I looked at Sophia across the room, showing a friend how to make leaves with a dry brush. And I knew a secret a fancy job can't erase. Grief gets lonely in quiet houses. Healing needs messy friends and line cutters. And a kid who steals the purple marker and makes you mad and then makes you laugh. So I told him no to the private door and yes to a bigger room. I said, let's build it at school, not just for your daughter, for all the kids who have to carry big things with small hands. He didn't love it. Power rarely loves no. He asked if I was saying no to him or to the money. I said I was saying yes to more children. He asked if I knew how complicated that would be. I said, everything worth doing is, and yeah, that landed a little. You could see it. We had to face the board next because institutions don't move unless someone is watching and taking minutes. We sat around a table that smelled like lemon polish and old opinions misses. Caldwell mentioned optics again. We can't appear to be a charity. And Richard surprised all of us by saying the optics he cared about were kids not falling through cracks, adults built to stay comfortable. Board member 1 planned to table it. Board member 2 coughed into a hand, like that was a solution, and I kept my posture calm, even though my chest felt like a drum, and I told them what the program could be. Time carved into the day for small groups teachers trained to see silence as signal, not problem. A studio where art isn't a reward, but a language, a corner with 2 soft chairs, and a sign that says, brave space where you can sit and breathe and say the thing when you're ready. The vote passed by a thread. Money talks, but stories walk people somewhere they didn't plan to go. And we turned an old storage closet into a room that smelled like clay and tempera and hope. We learned sentences that start with, I notice. And I wonder. Instead of, why did you do that? We practiced letting a drawing breathe. Before we asked what it meant, we told kids that feelings don't need to be fixed, to be welcomed. And to be honest, a few parents hated it. One dad said, we were going soft. Invited him to recess. He watched his son sit under the slide with Sophia and match his breath to hers. He didn't call again. 6 months later, the walls were a quilt of kid truth, discipline, referrals, down attendance, up, laughter, not so sharp around the edges. Sophia had become an ambassador. Without trying, she'd tap a shoulder and ask, want the brave space, like she was offering a spare coat. She'd stand by new students while they stirred paint and let the silence be easy again. She didn't become perfect. Nobody does. But she learned a fluent kindness, which is better. The painting that started it all hung in the foundation office we built with real dollars and real arguments, the Wellington Foundation for Children's Emotional Wellness. A mouthful I whispered like a prayer when nobody was around. Funded 12 schools by winter, and in our little studio, the late sun still came through those old windows and turned the painted leaves to gold. And I watched kids who had been labeled problems or shy or fine actually get seen for once, which is to say, fun. On our last assembly of the year, less a show and more a neighborhood, Sophia raised her hand and said one thing into the mic that I think about when I'm too tired to keep doing this. She said, when you miss someone, it hurts, but also you get to keep them here. And if you want to talk, we'll listen. And she didn't say I will, she said we, which was the whole point. Look, I'm not telling you I saved anyone. I'm telling you what happened when a school opened a door and a child walked through it. I'm telling you I turned down a private lifeboat because the mainland needed a bridge. I'm telling you, a powerful man sat still long enough to hear his daughter and then used his power to help other people's children. And I'm telling you, a board member who once told me not to draw attention to the situation later asked if her granddaughter could come paint after lunch. Yeah, that happened. And she laughed at a glitter joke like a person. And I thought, we're all teachable. Here's the part people argue about in the comments. Should it take money like Richard's to do what every school should already be doing? Should emotional literacy be a luxury amenity sponsored by a last name? Or do we take the help that shows up and let it force the system to catch up? Where's the line between philanthropy and policy, between optics and care, between what looks good and what does good, and how many kids are we willing to let wait while we polish the answer? Tell me what you think, really. If this story hit something you carry, hit like so the algorithm doesn't bury it. Share it with the one friend who thinks feelings are extra, and drop a comment about the hardest thing you've seen a kid face and the bravest thing a teacher did. Argue with me about the money, defend me for saying no to the private offer, or tell me I was naive. I'll read it, I'll learn, and tomorrow I'll be back in that studio with paint under my nails and a fresh stack of paper keeping the door open and the lights on until the next voice decides to walk through.